Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Spin Rack. I'm here with my boys, Cal and Petey. Say what's up, gents.
Hey, what's going on?
Yo, ready to rock?
Hey, so Absolute Batman, as you can see right here, has just achieved an astonishing milestone for comic books. It's just been one of the top comics throughout the entire year. And it's kind of weird because this is not the main comic. This is another world, basically, another universe. And the fact that it's so popular, people are now comparing it to this is this generation's Dark Knight. What do you think, gents? I'm going to pass this on to my boy Petey. Petey, tell me what you think. You agree, you disagree, and let's hear from you, and then we'll give it on to Cal.
Um, well, they're saying obviously this is hitting the New York Times bestseller list, the first trade, and even though the fans thought this was going to be, for some strange reason, thought this was going to be a total bust. The only similarities I can say to the Dark Knight was that instead of the fans thinking it was going to be a total bust, DC thought the Dark Knight was going to be a total bust, along with some other projects that they had going on, and they didn't do that much promotion, and it was a huge hit with the fans. So the thing of the lay of the land of DC, outside of I guess the Legion and what's the guy, the Titans selling, those were the books they had in the top 10. The DC sales were kind of low at that period, so Dark Knight was a big boom for them. I guess same Man of Steel miniseries, and then Watchmen gave them the critical success. This isn't the critical darling of the comic industry, so that's why I would take it away from saying it's anything like the Dark Knight, because the Dark Knight was a very big moment where Batman has always been a favorite, but his books were not selling, and he was in trouble with cancellation a couple times. He wasn't in trouble with cancellation at that point, but Dick Giordano was trying to do his best to reinvigorate the Batman some like line of books, and Frank Miller was one of them. He had a couple other things in line, but the next thing was Denny O'Neil. So it was a movement that with um, happened with the Dark Knight, that almost right before I think Byrne got there. So the Dark Knight is kind of the start of everything, kind of just like the tidal wave of DC of critical hits and sales going up, not catching Marvel, but them starting to catch up. So it had to be a critical darling. It had to be that people weren't reading Batman before. You had Scott Snyder. You had Thomas King. I think there's another writer that's been on there. So Batman's been the hot property. It wasn't so all of the pieces of it being the Dark Knight, outside of this guy being big, and the fans thinking that fans having a similar thought like DC, that it's not going to work. We already had Frank Miller do we already had him do Ronin. It had an initial buzz and it did so well initially, and then the fans kind of trailed off afterwards. So it doesn't have any of the bits outside of a big Batman, and the fans expecting it to fail. So those are the only things I can compare it to.
Okay. What about you, Cal?
Uh, you can see the influence of The Dark Knight Returns in Absolute Batman. So for them to say that it's this, generation's Dark Knight, like no, Dark Knight Returns was new. It was different. It was it was its own thing. This was Batman, uh, older, coming out of retirement, uh, using some staples in terms of literature: man versus man, man versus society, man versus self, man versus God, all those things going along with it in terms of the overall story. But it was also a Batman who was, he was a lot meaner, more violent, all of those particular things. So if you look at Absolute Batman, yeah, I can easily, make, connections between those two. So this isn't new. This is something that is still, this is something that is still reverberating with the influence of what happened with The Dark Knight Returns back in 1985. So for them to say that it's this generation, like, no, you would want a take on Batman that shows, oh, this is a different way to look at this character. This is a different way that we can execute the character. That's not the case with Absolute Batman. It is popular, okay, and the stories have been good. Stories have definitely been entertaining. More so, not necessarily just for what they're doing with Batman, but the villains, and where they've decided that these guys are not just dressed up as freaks, they're actual freaks. Where you have Mr. Freeze looking like Slender Man and the Joker looking like an actual demon. Bane, just like they really put it into those particular characters. But to call it that, it's like no, it's popular. It's selling very well at the end of the day, and great. But it's not the watershed moment, the milestone that the Dark Knight Returns was, because the Dark Knight Returns influenced Batman. After those four issues came out, forget about it. Everybody wanted to write that type of, they wanted to write that type of Batman. That's where Batman with the internal monologue became a staple. And even the adversarial nature, just flat out antipathy between Batman and Superman that was carried through the comics, for a good 30 years before they finally said, you know what, maybe we can tone this down just a bit. So no, I mean, it's doing very well, but no, not that. But I understand the whole thing of putting it in the title because hey, The Dark Knight Returns is one of, if not the most popular Batman story of all time. You got this going on over here, so you definitely get some people to come in and read it.
Well, thanks. I mean, and that's pretty good analysis from both of you. I think there's a little bit of, I agree with both of you, and it's pretty interesting that it's this generation has just been prepped for this new absolute Batman. I tell you, I said before, it's taken me completely by surprise how popular this whole series has taken on. I never would have thought this whole line of absolute Batman, Wonder Woman, Superman would have done anywhere near as good as it has,
You and me
and,
both.
and been as popular in the storyline as it's been. And so it's pretty interesting. Scott Snyder's been involved in some of the biggest Batman stories around. I mean, you have Dark Knight, the Joker, what is it, the Joker, the
Court
Batman Who Laughs,
Owls.
so it's Court of Owls. I mean, some pretty big stories. So he knows the character and knows the character well. Um, but I still have a little bit of reservation. I'm like, let's see how far this trend continues. That's it. I mean, can they do it for another year? I mean, is there going to be a movie treatment of this? I mean, you never know. I mean, probably this may be the new Batman that James Gunn is looking for, which will be really shocking
Oh,
compared.
okay. All right, all right, let's pump the brakes.
I'm just saying, like, it's just so popular.
But
You
it usually takes time for these things that are executed in a comic to make the jump to even animation. Look at a character say like Damian Wayne, who became popular. How long did it take Damian Wayne to make the jump from comic books to animation, to cartoons, where he was actually being featured there? It was a number of years. I think it was
Yeah, it
about
was.
7 years. And
Yeah,
then to make the jump from the comic book to actual live action, that takes
yes.
usually even longer. So
Easy.
it's not going to happen. I don't see that particular thing happening. And if DC was smart about this, okay, or at least like, this is all going to be my opinion, of course, but if they were smart about it, then when they decided to go into this whole thing with the Absolute Universe, they have a start date, but they also have an end date. And they're like, hey, we don't care how much these books are selling. This is the end date. We can extend them in different ways. We could extend them in like a mini series, this type of stuff if we want, but the ongoing stuff has a finite issue where after issue 30 or issue 33 or whatever it may be, we're going to go. And that's okay. It's going to be this regardless of the sales, because then we know that we have executed this properly and we don't have to worry about declining sales being the reason for we're not getting this done any longer. So if they, that's what I would hope they would do with this.
You're saying Warner Brothers, the most corporate of all the comic book companies around, is going to say, "Hey, let's wait." I think not. They're going to jump on this and once they figure out a way to monetize it. So I can't disagree with you on that one. You know,
I'm gonna disagree with that because for the most part, these companies don't care about the comic book companies. They don't. That's been since 1938. Their comic book companies are a very small part of a much, much bigger organization. The only time they really care about the comic books is when they start losing money. All right. If they pay, even when if they're paying for themselves overall, okay, we can let this slide if we're not losing money. Once this becomes a deficit, that's when they start paying attention to it. It's like, wait a minute, we're losing money here. Well, what's going on? But otherwise, the comic books are doing well. If they make good money, great. If they are breaking even, we're not losing any money. The only time they usually tend to focus on them is when money is not being made. And that's when they start making all those poor corporate decisions with it as well. So right now, if it's doing well, this is great because this means they're going to be hands off because they got
Yeah.
other stuff that they're going to be other stuff that they're going to be looking at. It
But they
takes. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
But they use these comic books, the comic book companies are really their IP generators, right? And that's the
Right.
whole reason they have them. You're right. They let them stand alone and say, hey, once a character becomes popular or something, they take them away and say, we're moving to movies or TV, and that's where the money's being made. Or you comic guys, we'll throw you guys a couple of bucks, and that's about it, right?
That's right.
Because in reality, comic books, some companies make millions, TV shows make tens of millions, and movies make billions. And so that's why the movie divisions, the DC is making hundreds of millions, probably billions, and the same thing goes with Marvel. So, but they need that idea generation to at least bring those stories forward. That's why we already said a lot of these stories are already storyboarded. You look at the comic, you're like, oh, there's a complete story.
They don't look at it as a complete storyboard.
They don't look at
Yeah,
it, but we know that. But I'm saying they should. It's right there. They
they
look at it
should,
and they can say,
but
hey, let me take this out, take it out.
well, who's it? I think Grant Morrison had a good way of putting it. He said, like, at least in the States, no, even outside of the States, comic books are not looked at as an art form. They're looked at as toilet graffiti.
In the United States, toilet graffiti.
Yeah, you go to the bathroom, you see the picture on the stall. That's what a comic book is. Like, hey, okay, I'm gonna go here. I'm gonna shoot a deuce. I'll get a little entertainment, and I'm out. That's it. They're not looked at as this art form. Like, oh, we can keep going back to this. This is a great medium. So many good things have come out of it. Even today, even today, they don't look at it like that. I don't know if they ever will. And you have characters. You have Superman, Batman, Spider-Man. Okay, you have these guys who have come out of comics, and they still don't look at it as a springboard, as a breeding ground, as an art form for where you can come over here and manipulate these things to greater success. They don't look at it like that. They just don't.
Well, that's the thing. I think about it when you said that. There's a video going around with what's it, Cree Summer, talking about one of her dates with Kadeem Hardison when they were together, and I guess they're both were comic book fans. I didn't know Kadeem was a comic book fan. I know Cree knew who the Dazzler was, and she was like, "Oh God, these cats." But at the same time, they said that when I guess it was either the new Deathlock and Kadeem Hardison wanted to get all of the issues that were printed, so they went around the city and they bought all, I guess, 12 issues, and then they read them. And I was just like, yo, that's comic book buying in and of itself, of trying to get back issues and going to different stores and all that, and the fun as kids we used to have trying to find old comic books that we didn't have, that we've seen in the checklist, and say, oh, this is going to cost how much. But that portion of childhood is just lost on people. That is just like, still the thing that there was for dumb kids. Sorry, I got to deal with these bad cats. He's trying to destroy my house.
Yeah. And even though the readership of comics now is much older than it used to be when we first started reading, it's still looked at as something for dumb kids. It really is. Okay, this is about what is this about? Okay, if you look at the stuff they've done with like the Marvel TV shows and what they really thought they needed to do in order to maintain a male audience, which was just, oh, we're just going to show some razzle dazzle, a few fight scenes, and then the person will somehow get powered up, and that'll be it. That's what they distilled comic books into. It's just a bunch of guys fighting each other. Eventually, somebody becomes even more powerful, and that would be it. They threw out everything else that made comic books enjoyable for the audience that found them, enjoyable for so long. So it's unfortunate that they have that mentality when it comes to comics, but it persists. It really does persist, even with something as good as the Christopher Nolan Batman series, where he was like, I want to keep Batman grounded. Translation, I don't want to do any of the comic book stuff. I don't want to have a guy with the freeze gun. I don't want to have a Lazarus pit with people coming back. I don't want Man Bat. I don't want any of that stuff. Okay. I want stuff that could actually happen in the real world. But none of this stuff happens in the real world. It doesn't. You don't get somebody breaking you over their knee. You get sent to prison, and then the prison doctor just kind of slides your spine back into place. That doesn't happen in the real world. But those are the things there. But it's along the same lines where you look at these things, and because comic books they're fantasy characters set in the real world. If they were set in a medieval world, if they were set in a prehistoric world, nobody would have any problem with the things that they do. But once they get, you have a character like Batman, he's set in the real world, and you're like, oh man, look at the stuff that this dude is doing, and type of no, we got science. I want to keep it right over there. They don't want to execute. They don't want to execute those things, and because of that, they have this look at comic books on a whole as something that it is puerile or jejune for that matter, and they just don't change their minds. It doesn't matter how successful. It doesn't matter how many comics they sell, how good they do at the box office. They do not look at them as a legitimate art.
Okay. I mean, I kind of agree with you there, Kyle. They don't give it the space, and I think that there's also the audience don't accept it. I know when I pull out a comic on a subway and start reading, people are like, "Whoa!" I see people looking like, "Yo, hadn't." One guy literally told me last week, "I haven't seen anybody do that in like forever." I'm like, "What?" You know?
You ever got you ever get no, I used to have I remember I used to do on the train, and there would always be some other guy who was in the know, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, is this gonna be a thing? And they usually come over and they're like, oh, can I see the cover that just come
Yeah.
out? It was someone like, oh, it's safe.
It was so wild when he told me that. I haven't seen that in like forever. I mean, I guess written media that people read have has dropped over time. But I thought I was like, hey, I got to read up on what's going on. If I don't read some of this stuff on the train, I'll never get to it. Right?
Well, it's funny because this friend of mine who lived in San Francisco, he came back in town, and we didn't talk about, one of the things I found with a bunch of people that I knew in college or at some point as guys, we wouldn't necessarily talk about reading comic books, even though I was always buying them. It's funny because I'd be going there, and then we talked after we didn't work together, and I said he was saying he was selling this kind. He went to Europe, and he was like toured Europe, and he came back. He had no money, so he sold his comic books. This is about I want to keep my John Byrne comics
Oh,
over here, and
heartbreaking.
I was like, whoa, that's crazy. Like we didn't talk about any of this stuff. So he's like, I met him in I guess it was somewhere off the G train in Brooklyn, and he was like, yeah, he said bring some comic books. So I brought like 300. I think I brought like Sin City. I think I bought something like Jeff Darrow. And it was him, his other friend, and this. I think she was from Spain, and this girl from Spain, she was very particular on how she wanted to do things. Like she would the kiss on either side of the cheek when you meet, and she didn't know who I was. But that's how she met the people. When they asked her for coffee before eating, she was like, no. So she was, but it was like, I think they were a little bit younger than me, but I brought these books, and they were like, they were like in awe of these things. And it's just like it was interesting to be in a place where you have people that appreciate comic books for just that. The people who've been, not to say they were definitely worldly. Obviously, someone from Spain that was visiting comes from somewhere else, but it was just like being able to bring comic books into a place where people would be welcome to see it and look at it and this type of stuff. Whereas most of the time, it's just like, well, is this one really expensive? That sort of thing, which gets kind of tiring.
Well, that's the American thing. If you went to like manga in Japan, well, in Japan, everybody reads comic books, and they make comic books for. I mean, they make comic books for everything. Literally, they make comic books about golf. They make comic books about bowling, fishing. They make comic books about everything. Everybody reads comic books. But you have comics that are going to be aimed at kids, comic books who are aimed at an audience, but it doesn't have the same perception as it does here in the West overall. And if you got a manga out there in Japan and it's hot, you're like a rock star. People stop you like, hey, hey, what's it going? We love the book. Get an autograph, get a picture. Over here, you could have like literally, you could be Scott Snyder, got this top selling comic book, selling millions of copies. You walk all over. Nobody knows who the hell you are.
Yeah, and this thing is a lot of. It's not like the hard part is movies as high end as people think they are. They are borrowing from novels, comic books, and comic book people are borrowing from movies because like the biggest thing for comic book guys, and it hasn't necessarily changed that much, was initially like Citizen Kane. And the comic book guys in the past looked at the shots and they were like, for any of your mundane scenes, all that got, pulled in and moved into comic books. But at the same time, you have an art form which in film is borrowing, you go into things and you're seeing what's the name? History of Violence, and you say, "Oh, that was a comic book." It's like a two guns. And like, oh, this is a comic book. So it's like to be an art form that you can, and every time these things that were there was it Road to Perdition, that sort of thing. It's like people
Yep.
look at these things, they're like, "Whoa, this is great," and the next thing you know, like, "Oh, this was a comic book." And they don't look at it like they probably in the ideas like with a book like on my other end. This and my mother was into comic books when she was younger, but she also went to film and she would be like, "Oh, I like the carpetbaggers. Let me read the book." And she was like, "Oh, this is a good book," and she would pass it off. But that's the thing where you understood that where the information came from or the story came from might be richer as you get to it, and people like, oh, they took Batman and Tim Burton made it into a substantial character, and it's like, no, all that stuff was already in there. But a lot of people look at, oh, Tim Burton made Batman into a character that could work on film, because the Adam West that didn't really work, and it's like, okay, no, if the Adam West movie, if they had done more stuff that was in the TV show instead of starting with the shark, and because I think the ending still is one of the best movie endings ever of a movie. Not them running, but how the resolution, even though it was jokey. But if they had done stuff that was in a TV show, that sort of things, and kind of did it right, and not have the bomb scene, I think they could have had a fun movie, a better movie. It was fun for kids, even though there's parts as a kids I struggle with. But at the same time, they might have been something that people remember better. They remember the show. The show still holds. The movie is a little iffy, but you know they look at it and say it's not as good. The comic isn't good as the movie. When you can go in there and you're like, oh, there's a ton of other stories to go through. Whereas you might just scratch the surface in the film.
I think that you really hit it. Both of you hit the nail on the hammer on the nail, and that comic books have, at least here in the West, people look at it more. It's like they don't give it the same type of focus as books and saying it's just big picture books, basically, right? For the kids were, but I think that, like you just pointed out, there have been comic books that are like Perdition, Two Guns, but unfortunately, a lot of them have not been Marvel and DC. Their focus has basically been they basically focus on the superhero comics. Now, Cal had pointed out before, and you too, where at one point these companies had a whole broad publishing. They did romance, they did western, they did detective. But as time has went on, the one that was most popular for either one of them was the superhero, and that's what they're living by. And unfortunately, people just stick and say, "Hey, this is it." Now you go to other countries like Kyle was just mentioning manga. Manga is in all forms of media. It's not just, first of all, it's different types of not media, but also types of content. But they even South Korea, they've really been pushing the webtoons, right? The whole webtoons. You see webtoons that they do on these digital comics that they become K dramas or K shows, right off of that. So comics have been an important part all around the world in pushing shows, movies, and TV, even though a lot of people don't recognize it as such going
Well,
forward.
comics superheroes didn't have to be the only thing. The only problem is that the hearings crippled the other forms. They had the weird science, they had the horror stuff, they had the westerns and whatnot. And the company that was doing the best stuff of that thing was totally crippled. So the only thing they had was Mad. And Mad Magazine was something that even if you weren't into comics, people would read Mad Magazine for years. It's not till I guess the '90s or so when people finally figured out it was a comic book and they started putting it down, but it was something that kids or girls, adults, you'd see people reading magazine, and so every time they finally figured out, wait a second, this is a comic book, or even the girls that used to read Archie, like, wait a second, this is a comic book, and they started pulling away. But the art form has been stunted in America. We haven't gotten the stink of the those hearings off of the comic book, and because it only the superhero genre became all in one genre, and having westerns, having space and sci-fi, having humor, and having romance in them, because they would have little simple romantic stuff, but Marvel kind of went into the romantic scenes, like the heavy scenes, the that sort of thing in there, or the love triangles and that sort of thing, where the triangles was is can Batman have a relationship or Superman having a relationship with Lois, and Clark Kent wanting to have a relationship with Lois, like simpler things. So I think that people look at it, and the comic book industry went the way of superheroes. Noah was struggling, and superheroes came back, and it was just a super genre. It took all the genres in at once. Oh my God, you guys! Can you guys stop, please? Oh my God.
Okay. So, hey, to wrap it up, Cal, do you have anything you want to finish up with?
All- Absolute Batman, very successful, popular, entertaining. It is not The Dark Knight Returns. Scott Snyder will tell you it is not The Dark Knight Returns.
Though he said The Dark Knight is one of his favorite comic books of all
But
time.
this is not The Dark Knight Returns.
The question was, is this generation's Dark Knight?
It is not The Dark Knight Returns. It is not this generation's The Dark Knight Returns because it would have to be something different than The Dark Knight Returns in order to accomplish that. That's why The Dark Knight Returns was so significant.
Okay, hey,
It's not full
I
on, and you can't throw it into manga. It's not full on bat manga, and didn't change. The thing is saying we need more of this.
Even if even if you look at The Dark Knight Returns and it was so influential, though the influence of The Dark Knight Returns was gradual because there was a lot of people who read it. And then these guys started getting into comics. Later on, you would get to see this. It wasn't like, okay, after The Dark Knight Returns, everybody started writing Batman that way. No, because you had Crisis. And if you look at the stories were not, you know, in line necessarily with what we saw in The Dark Knight Returns, with the grittiness, the grim, the dark, that type of stuff. That would come later, but it did come, and the influence was always there. So that's where you're looking at. Here, you just have a very successful series. That's it. You already have a character, who's popular. So he's popular. He has a very successful series. That's great. Dark Knight Returns was with the character who, while he was, as Petey said, this was a darling, fan favorite. People liked them, but the popularity wasn't there. Sales weren't there. And even after the Dark Knight Returns, that was still the case. So it's just two different things, and it's two different time periods, two different types of stories. But I get the whole idea of slapping, Dark Knight Returns on the title, if you're just trying to push your article a little bit more.
got it. All right, so hey, if you like what you hear, give us a comment, subscribe, join our membership, thumbs up, spin a rack.
We
We're
are
out.
out.